Hello, hello, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. My name is Nikki, and I am joined by the wonderful, magnificent, Amy Hollenkamp, RD to the maximum.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're going to get the rhythm eventually. And today we are talking all about B vitamins. You tuned in last time for the fat-soluble vitamins and their pals. Today is all about the Bs. So, Amy, start us off. Do you think we should go in order? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, 12? Might as well just go in order? Or do you have a favorite that you're really itching to talk about?
Let's go in order. And I haven't done as much prep as Nikki has for the B vitamin. I
searched on PubMed for like 20 minutes and I'm bragging about it. But yeah, totally.
Well, that's more prep than we usually do for these.
That's true.
For these episodes. But yeah, let's start with thiamine. I think thiamine is a really interesting one because
vitamin B1, for those of you who are not in the know.
Vitamin B1 is thiamine. It's just a nutrient that I think can be commonly low, and many people that are on restrictive diets, whether they're SIBO diets or even going gluten-free, if you're cutting out grains that are fortified with B1 or not eating like things like legumes, like a lot of the stuff we pull out are going to be good sources of thiamine when you're on a restrictive diet. So it's a little bit of a dicey, like I find a lot of people, especially that go low carb, can be thiamine deficient, and that one is just super critical for nervous system function, for things like motility.
Which is huge. Huge.
Right. Like, you know, the health of the nervous system is going to rely on thiamine, and we know that there is such a brain-gut axis component with digestion. It's super important to make sure you're getting enough thiamine so you have enough acetylcholine, which is crucial for motility. But yeah, I find thiamine is one that a lot of my clients are under in when I look at their chronometer data that I have them do. It's a commonly deficient one that they're not getting in as much as they should. And part of it, again, is I think it's just when you restrict certain foods, you're going to be low in thiamine. Yeah.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of grains, a lot of legumes, and even if you want to kind of take another angle too, like if you do AIP, I know flax seeds are pretty high in thiamine as well. So if you're restricting all nuts and seeds and grains and legumes, AIP is potentially a nice little cesspool of vitamin B1 deficiency as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know Chris Masterjohn has talked about this in the past. With being low carb, like sometimes if people are trying to get carbs back in and they've cut out carbs for a while, sometimes if they're low in thiamine, they have insulin production issues because thiamine's really important for insulin production. So it can make you be a little bit more carb intolerant.
Yeah.
So if you're a little more carb intolerant and that's not the norm for you historically, thiamine might be an interesting nutrient to check out or just make sure you're getting enough of.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, is that you burn through a lot of thiamine in the process of carbohydrate metabolism and sugar metabolism. So I remember this one case that really stood out to me. Part of, and I'll actually read, I've got some notes that I already had this was not part of my prep, but I had this document I've been kind of growing over the course of about a year. Where the devil is it? But I had this little handy list. All right. Vulnerable populations. So this was from a Self-Hacked article. Vulnerable populations. Athletes or really active people, alcohol abusers, pregnant and nursing women, diabetics, cancer patients, obese individuals, people who are hyperthyroid, and people who are on diuretics and chemotherapy. And if you think about, like, in a lot of those scenarios, so athletes, pregnant and nursing women, hyperthyroidism, you could make the argument that their metabolism is really active, right? They're like burning through a ton of calories and they're building new tissues, they're doing new things. either because of, athletic achievement, or they're growing a human being, or their thyroid hormone is through the roof and they're burning through a lot of metabolism with a really, really elevated metabolism. And then you've got inflammatory states like chemotherapy. You could make that argument. Cancer, there's a lot of research now that carbohydrate metabolism and insulin resistance is involved in a lot of different cancers. And then obesity and alcoholism and diabetes, you could make the metabolic kind of argument for those as well. But I remember I had this patient, she had some, what sounded like disordered eating, kind of body image issues for a while. And she got really, really into, I don't think it was weightlifting. What is it called? Figure posing?
Finger pose? Did you say finger posing?
Figure.
Okay.
Yes, finger posing, people. If you're missing out on the video right now. So finger posing. No, so it's like you do the weightlifting with the goal of getting your physique to a certain level that you have like no fat on your body whatsoever. And then you go and you pose on a stage in this very uncomfortable looking thong bikini, and you like flex your muscles in front of all these people who literally judge you on your appearance. It sounds like absolute misery. I would never sign up for this, but if you want to do it, more power to you. But I've had a couple of friends or acquaintances who have done figure posing, and I've seen the pattern. So when I talked to her, we talked about her diet at that time, and she had the exact same diet as the two people who I knew who did figure posing, which was chicken and broccoli. And that is it. She only ate chicken and broccoli for months and months and months and months. And she was working out twice a day, still going to work like a normal, adult person. She did the figure posing competition, and then out of the blue, her coach ghosted her. Just disappeared and vaporized off the planet. Yeah, totally ghosted her and disappeared, never to be heard from again. And she told me in the appointment, she said, I was so unhealthy and I was so starved and malnourished. Like, I wanted to eat different foods, but like I didn't know what to eat. So she said the night of her figure posing competition, she literally ate a whole bunch of cheesecake and I think like fettuccine Alfredo or something. I don't remember. It was definitely cheesecake and something else like a pasta dish. And she felt absolutely wretched. And then it was one of those like never the same sense kind of stories. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that it made me think of was, okay, here you are working out really hard twice a day, and you're getting absolutely no sources of thiamine in your body for, I think it was like 9 months or something, 8 or 9 months. And then you go and you eat a bunch of carbs and fat with this pasta and cheesecake binge. Your poor body was probably severely deficient in a number of different nutrients, including thiamine. And then she was like horribly bloated and had GI problems ever since then. It's like, well, yeah, because you probably just like doused the fire with kerosene and had this raging deficiency. So anyway, one of the things that I had her start on right away was a fat-soluble B1 supplement, because I was like, you know what? It stands to reason that you would be deficient in that, and it's certainly not going to hurt to get some extra in your body for a month or two while we're working on reintroducing foods, and got her on prokinetics and probiotics and all of that jazz. But my goodness gracious. So that is all to say that I think that, eating a lot of carbohydrates, even, believe it or not, just having like one bender with a lot of carbohydrates and sugar could make the difference in sucking up the remaining B1 that you have and then tipping you more into a deficiency if you have a lot of like binge eating kind of swings, or if you are a person who will like be on the diet for a week or two and then totally go off the rails and eat, I don't even know, like an entire cake all in one sitting. I've had patients who struggle with that sort of stuff. Like that could also induce a pretty wicked deficiency. And then if you're not aware, and then now you're terrified of carbs and you're terrified of legumes, well, you could have a long-standing deficiency or an insufficiency and not realize it. So I do think it's pretty common. And I measure B1 in blood work in a lot of my patients. And a lot of people with IBS and SIBO come back. I don't see it blatantly deficient per LabCorp's range frequently. I think it's below like 66. The range is like 66 to 200. I don't see it below 66 very frequently, but I see a lot of people in like the 70 something or 80 something range where it's like low normal, and that's not cool. And I do see that thiamine, either through food or a supplement or both preferably, can really make the difference for those people in their motility.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think the motility aspect's so big too. And again, like we talk about things like prokinetics. Well, like if the machinery doesn't have the nutrients it needs to function, that's big problems. That's big problems, as I like to say.
It's like you're pumping the gas on a car that has a seized up engine.
Right.
Like, all right, good luck. No matter how much you pump that gas, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. And I think it's so important too, like, and I feel like I'm a broken record, but to
you are, Amy. All right. And that's the end of the podcast. See you later, guys. We're signing up. No, I'm kidding.
To reiterate that, like, again, there's potential consequences of being restrictive and having low intakes of things like thiamine. I mean, that could be make or break from a motility standpoint. But it's not discussed. Like, you know, like nutrition as a whole is I don't know, not important as long as you're restricting. And it's like, well, no, it is important.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, like, honestly, and I wasn't aware of this in my profession until the last 5 years or so, but, like, frankly, functional medicine doctors will brag their asses off and say, oh, we get to the root cause, and, you know, we talk about nutrition, the importance of food as medicine. And it's like, yeah, but the only angle that they talk about it is restriction. And honestly, like, I lived in Arizona and I practiced in a town where there was a naturopathic school that was very well respected. But I saw that from the naturopaths all the time too, either the students from the student clinic or practicing naturopaths in practice. Naturopaths very frequently also will teach you how to restrict the shit out of your diet, but they won't teach you what foods to reintroduce or talk to you about, like, why you might not tolerate a food right now, but you can tolerate it in the future if you do X, Y, and Z. It's just like, oh, run a 99 item IgG food panel, tell people, you know, to cut out the 20 different foods that they're sensitive to, and then cool, you're cured. Food is medicine. It's like, well, yeah, bull crap.
Right. Well, and I think, like, I don't know, it's wild to me. I totally am in agreement with what you're saying. Per usual.
We're on the same page, my darling. But
yeah, it's a bummer. It's a real bummer just because I think it prevents people from getting well. Like, if it's so focused on restrictions and not balanced eating and getting the nutrition that you need.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting too, like the more extreme forms of thiamine deficiency, like Wernicke's encephalopathy, like where there's literally a lot of seizures and things like that. Like, you can see that side's obviously so clear, but like, again, what you're saying, you could have suboptimal levels and still have like dysfunction in your nervous system.
Yeah.
That's not as obvious as that, clearly.
Yeah. And well, and to your point, I think that modern medicine is good at picking out like the really, really, really overt deficiencies. And we'll get to this when we talk about cobalamin, but similarly, I've had patients who are like really low normal on vitamin B12, and the doctor's like, no, you're fine. It's like, but are you? But are you? Like, you know, when you look at those LabCorp ranges or those Quest ranges, or even from a functional lab, oftentimes, you almost never want to be on the extreme end, one or the other.
Right.
You know, if it's a bad thing or an inflammatory thing, say like C-reactive protein, then, or like sedimentation rate, you want that to be on the low end of normal range. Like, I would love to see CRP and sed rate come back at 0.
Right.
For nutrients, you want them on the higher end of the normal range. Like, you want to have more B12 than the average person. You want to have more thiamine than the average person. So these people who come back with 70.2 or whatever it is on their LabCorp blood work, it's like, no, man, we need to get you up well into the mid 100s if you want your motility to work and you want your vagus nerve to work. And then you think about people who are stuck on betaine HCl supplements forever and ever. It's like, well, do you have thiamine?
Right.
Because then you need your vagus nerve to make stomach acid. You need stomach acid to digest your dang food. So there's probably a lot of people wasting time on betaine HCl supplements when really they need thiamine. So,
right.
I don't know, what's more root causal?
Right.
Like
you
the
rock.
Root cause of the root cause, you know?
Right. No, it's totally true. I think there's so many layers. Like, I always tell my clients, like, there's layers to this stuff. And so the more you can peel back the layers, the better. I think we always stop at what I see people stopping at is like, oh, I've got SIBO, that's my root cause. And then some people might go a little bit deeper where it's like, oh, I have MMC issues. And it's like, well, why? And then it's like, so there's all these different layers that you want to unfold. But again, like, probably the one that's you can do definitive testing on pretty easily is the nutrition side of things, as long as you have a provider that's willing to run labs, which can sometimes be a problem. But you know, and again, you can do tracking to sort of see where you're at and to assess any problem areas. Like, again, for me, there's a few problem areas from a nutrition standpoint that I kind of have to be aware of. But I think sometimes some of the things we get so hung up on, like, it's really hard to get definitive data on. Like, it's more qualitative than quantitative. And I think, like, nutrition's one thing that's easier to quantitatively look at and to get data on and to make sure that you're getting enough of. I think working with someone helps, but anyone can do a chronometer for 3 days and sort of see where they're at with some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about this on the last episode, that we've been doing that more for ourselves, because even we do this for a living. Like, we both have licenses or certifications in nutrition. We both talk about nutrition all day, every day. And yet we still like to check in every now and then with Chronometer or MyFitnessPal or whatever it might be, because there's still little holes and deficits that you can fill. Like, I realized I don't get as much iron in my diet as I thought I did. I do pretty well on fiber, generally, especially, oh my gosh, Amy. Late July through the month of August is my favorite time to be alive. You want to know why? It's blazingly hot and humid in North Carolina, but my parents have fig trees. So a couple times a week, my dad will bring me a big thing of figs. Oh my God, I'm getting fiber like you wouldn't believe right now.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. And when we get into later August, in North Carolina, we have these gigantic grapes. They're literally bigger than my eyeball.
Oh my gosh.
There's 2 varieties, muscadine and scuffernong grapes. Oh my God, they're so good. And again, I'm like swimming in fiber. Fiber up to the eyebrows the entire month of August.
Oh
and
my
I love
gosh. Dang, girl.
Yeah. So
you crazy with that fiber.
Yeah. Pooping like the Dickens.
Yeah, but, your bowel movements are moving.
They're all fluffed up from the fiber. But seriously, it's nice. Like, I'm still doing it today. And, all right, on Chronometer for today. Okay, wait for it to load. Keeping me in suspense. All right, I'm already over my daily, 25 gram or whatever it is goal for fiber. So that's great. Iron, 33%. And I've eaten breakfast and lunch. So I sure as hell better make up for that with dinner, apparently. Calcium, I have totally sucked on today. Vitamin C, folate, B12, not so much. So I've got a couple of holes to make up for dinner. But it's really good to bring your awareness to this and realize, oh, okay. Like, I'd fallen into that trap of, I eat healthier than most people, therefore I'm probably good. No. Not so much. Like, don't let your ego get in the way. Don't fall into that trap of, I eat pretty healthy. No.
Well, and I think, like, I don't know. There's, like, certain things that I need to probably eat more of, like, I eat legumes, but I could eat more of that are pretty nutrient dense. Like sometimes, I don't know. I could definitely do better in certain areas for sure. And I think legumes might be an option for me that I'm going to try to eat a little bit more of to get a different variety of things into my diet.
Yeah. And likewise, I think we rely a lot on hummus as far as like legumes go. We do a lot of hummus. But I think I'm going to spice it up a little bit. And I have this recipe for a black bean dip that's really quite yummy.
Oh, yum.
I'll have to share it with you, but it's pretty good, and I can make it in like a big batch, and then it freezes really well, and I can keep it here at the office for lunches. So I think I'm going to make a big batch of like my black bean dip and keep that around because I think I need a little bit more variety in the legume department as well, because we really over rely on chickpeas.
Yeah, I'm like curious. I really want to do like a big batch of some sort of soup where I throw just a whole bunch of different vegetables in. Yeah. And then I can throw in like some lentils and potato and things like that. And maybe like some chicken or some protein of some sort, and like make a big batch of that. I think like soups, especially ones that like are thick and you can kind of chew and are warm, like I generally do really well with that digestively too. Like I like that, those types of foods, and you can get a lot of different stuff packed into a soup, like from a simplicity standpoint, or like a stew. It's kind of like a stew really when it gets thick and like just pretty robust. Like I like it pretty pretty diverse in there. So I'm gonna do that and probably throw in some lentils, get some thiamine up in my soup.
Yep. Yeah, I think soup, I'm probably going to reserve soup batching until the fall when I could justify eating something quite that hot. I really like making big batches of veggie lasagna. And I have meat in it too, but it's kind of evolved over the years, but I'll do like a layer of roasted veggies that are like bell peppers and mushrooms and tomatoes and onion and garlic out the wazoo. I'll do a layer of that, and then a layer of like, pasta sauce or red sauce, layer of crumbled up hamburger meat, layer of like fake, dairy-free cheese. Like now they have Kite Hill has a fake ricotta that's pretty good, and a fake mozzarella. Nice. Bioco's brand has a good mozzarella that I like. So I'll do like a layer of the fake cheeses and then just layer that a couple of times. I don't even put noodles in it half the time now because I'm like, meh. It's just like a veggie meat casserole at this point. Yeah. But then that freezes really well too. So a lot of the time I'll do that as well. But I think I think I'm going to wait until the fall until I could justify keeping the oven on for all those hours and heating up the house that much. So we'll But anyway, we digress. Back to the B vitamins. So B1 in our typical style. B1, super important for motility, gut-brain axis function. If you want to stand a chance at moving food through your system or digesting your food via things like stomach acid and enzyme output, OMG, keep your eyes peeled for thiamine. And I will throw this out there as one final note. I've also noticed that the more blatant cases of thiamine deficiency can sometimes mimic or get misdiagnosed as POTS. A lot more like orthostatic hypotension and like dizziness and that sort of stuff. And I've had some patients who, they'll look up the symptoms online, and like I remember this one kid, he's college age, so that's why I call him a kid, but he had such bad reactions that he had whittled himself down to eating 3 foods. 3, trace, Amy, trace. Foods. It was like some variation of like a paleo cracker, one very specific type of jam that he could tolerate, and then like one other thing, I think. And he had been eating that for months by the time we got together and talked about his symptoms. But for him, a lot of his symptoms, it was less about like bloating and diarrhea, but it was more about he would get these really scary POTS type symptoms from food. Like shortly after he would eat, he would get these like, dizzy, hypotensive, kind of woozy feelings, and it was scaring the crap out of him. And then we talked a bit. And that was another thing where I was like, look, let's get some B1 in you. Just kind of see how much that gains us. And then we'll start picking apart, stool test results and SEMA results and whatnot as that comes in. But that was really helpful for him as well. And I felt comfortable doing that even before we got a measurement on him, because I was like, dude, we need to work on this now. We don't even want to wait for the test result to come back in. Let's just get you started on something.
Right. It's like autonomic, anything that's autonomic type dysfunction. If you're having like blood pressure type
heart
swings.
rate, blood pressure.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was pretty bad stuff, but he's doing a lot better now. He's able to eat most foods now. But it was pretty wild at the time.
Yeah.
What? Was that
I don't know. I'm doing weird stuff today.
She gave me a very peculiar thumbs up. I thought that was like some weird hint that I wasn't getting.
I feel like we're deep into the afternoon and we're not maybe used to this deep. Now. I've had a very interesting long day, so I'm gonna give you my weird thumbs up. And
okay, why not? Sure, I'll take it. But on that note, another thing I want to throw out there for thiamine is that for whatever reason, the fat-soluble forms of thiamine seem to be better absorbed, and I tend to use them more as a supplement. I think like you can do normal run-of-the-mill thiamine in like a multivitamin, but if you want to try to get your levels up more quickly and you have some of these more overt symptoms and you want to tackle it a little bit quicker, there are two forms. There's one called benfotiamine and one called lipothiamine. They seem fairly interchangeable. Supposedly, per the company that sells it, lipothiamine might cross the blood-brain barrier slightly better. I don't know. There's like one study. I don't know if I buy it.
Right.
But usually, I like that company, I think it's Ecological Formulas. They have a lipothiamine product, and I like that it's just the single thing. The only benfotiamine supplement that I found here in the States that looked like it was a decent dose was one from Life Extension, and it's coupled with the water-soluble form of B1. So I was like, I don't know if they're going to inhibit or compete with each other, so I'd rather just do the single ingredient if I can. So usually I'll have people do like the lipothiamine form or the allithiamine. They have two products, but it's the same ingredient. So for what it's worth, usually I do have people do the fat-soluble version, and I've had some patients where that's made a really big difference for them.
Yeah, like benfotiamine. It's kind of a weird. It
is, because you want to call it benfotiamine, but there's no H. It's thiamine, which makes no sense. Yeah. I don't know.
Weird.
Yep. But yeah, but let's move on because we have a lot of B's to get to. So let's... Yeah,
I feel like we're moving slow, Nikki.
Maybe B vitamins needs to be like a part 1, part 2 deal.
I think maybe.
Honestly, I am shuddering at the thought of getting to B9 and B12 because that's when the can of worms opens with MTHFR, and I'm probably going to go on a psychopath rant. So
yeah, we save the psycho. I think we maybe bit off more than we could chew, thinking we could do all the B's in one.
Okay, this is actually that's a load off. So we'll get through a couple more B vitamins today, and then we'll do part 2 next time.
Yes.
So maybe like B9, B12, and vitamin C could all be in an episode together. Because we actually have a lot of stuff to talk about with vitamin C as well. Okay. Well, then moving on, nonetheless, let's talk about vitamin B2, aka riboflavin. So, your thoughts first, my dear, and then I will...
Yeah. Well, I think like B1, B2, and B3 are all a part of energy metabolism in some way. And again, I think riboflavin's an interesting one. It plays a role in mucous membranes, which I think's really interesting. Usually, if there's a problem with deficiency, like outright deficiency, you can see you'll get like little chapped areas around the corners of the mouth. I can't remember if riboflavin you get the big tongue too. Do you remember? I can look it up real quick. I forget
which is which. Yeah, look it up because now I'm curious. I forget which is which. I always got B2 and B3 screwed up in school. Like, because if you look, like when you're learning the Krebs cycle or the glycolytic cycle, like you look at all these biochemical cycles in the body, and literally the cofactors for everything is B2 and B3. So
Right.
In a way, I kind of always lumped them together, but now I'm seeing them a little bit more as unique entities in, more recent years. But yeah, I think
it is inflammation of the tongue, glossitis.
Okay. Yeah. And that would be super, super overt deficiencies.
Right.
Probably on a level that we don't see very commonly in the developed world. But again, gosh, weird hiccup burp. My gosh. So also, oddly enough, I see this come back low normal or moderately deficient when I do things. I don't usually run this through LabCorp, but I will look at it on an organic acids test or the NutriEval from Genova, and I see it come back either moderately or quite deficient more often than I ever thought I would, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, you sure as heck need riboflavin if you want energy. The other thing, too, that I think gets less press is that I found that riboflavin has been really helpful for a lot of my histamine intolerant patients because you need riboflavin to make DAO, diamine oxidase, the enzyme that degrades histamine in the gut. So, when we talk about histamine intolerance and DAO, I do feel like a lot of people understand that DAO is made at the brush border and you need a good, healthy, strong gut epithelial barrier to make it. So if you have leaky gut, you're not going to make as much DAO. I think that gets enough press, that most people get that. But not a lot of people are talking about how you need riboflavin to make DAO. And I think actually one more, there might be a mineral. I could bring it up on the mineral episode, but let me look it up too in my notes. I think maybe copper as well, but I could be incorrect about that. I'm going to look it up really quick, but would you like to interject with anything else on riboflavin?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's interesting. I know our gut microbes can make it as well. I think, again, we've talked about on the past episodes that probably the production, I need to do a little bit more research on how much gets actually absorbed and what just gets used by microbes, metabolized by other microbes. But yeah, I think that, it's interesting that you're seeing it come back as low on the NutriEvals more commonly. It's not something that I typically have had people look into a whole bunch. But maybe, again, from a histamine standpoint, that makes sense that it would be more beneficial.
And I was able to bring up some notes that I had on histamine. So basically there's the extracellular pathway and the intracellular pathway that your body uses to degrade histamine. So extracellular meaning outside the cell. So for that, you need a couple of things. HDC is an enzyme that needs vitamin B6, which I kind of forgot about. And that's involved in that extracellular pathway. To make DAO, you need riboflavin and also copper and... Oh, crap, I have to zoom. Hold on. Moment of suspense. For it. Can't see the slide. I have to actually open it. Calcium. Calcium, copper, and riboflavin are needed to make DAO. And then the next step to make ADH, you need zinc, vitamin C, niacin, and thiamine. So really, a lot of those B vitamins are needed in the processing of histamine. But in particular, I've used supplemental riboflavin in a number of really overt histamine intolerance cases where I felt like leaky gut was not the only thing driving that forward. And it wasn't just immune production. It was really from the leaky gut standpoint. And riboflavin as a standalone supplement has been helpful for some people.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's interesting about the calcium too. I remember this was way back in the day because I used to work under Laura Schoenfeld, the RD. She's in North Carolina, you know her. But she hypothesized and didn't really know the mechanism, but she said she was seeing more people that went paleo, and this could be so many different reasons, that had histamine intolerance. And again, maybe they weren't doing it completely right, or like making sure they're nourished, but she had mentioned like that calcium. She sort of made a connection that maybe calcium was at play.
Yeah.
And she had done some preliminary research, but like was still not not super conclusive. But I remember her having different theories swirling around as to whether calcium was a major factor in some way. And it's interesting that, turns out it is, from what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and it is interesting. It's funny. So Laura Schoenfeld lives like 30 minutes from where I am. We haven't met in person to this day. We keep kind of like missing each other and trying to meet. So we're like Facebook friends who have never actually met each other. It's very bizarre.
Right.
But I remember she had an article a number of years ago about how calcium is neglected on a paleo diet. And I remember at the time, it struck me because I remember when I first got into this space and I was in my own gut healing journey, and I was, cutting out carbs and grains and legumes. And at the time, I remember a lot of the paleo sphere was very dismissive about calcium. They were like, nah, you're good. The RDA is probably way too high. You don't need that much calcium. You're good, man. It's cool. We don't need dairy. Screw dairy. Right. And it was this very like anti-dairy, very like flippant towards calcium attitude. And then it was like, I don't even know, like maybe 5-6 years ago, I think that she had an article on her blog talking about how, like maybe the RDA is a little bit on the high side. Like maybe you don't need 1,000 milligrams of calcium, but you probably need more than like 400, right?
Right. Like, and from sources that are bioavailable, not like almonds.
Yeah.
Is like, kind of her.
Yeah.
So I know exactly which article you're talking about.
Maybe you need like 800
milligrams,
right. But similarly, like, okay, today I was saying on Chronometer again, like I have gotten 16% of my daily value of calcium. The little bit that I've gotten came from the almond meal muffin that I had this morning, and that's pretty much it. So I am not doing such a hot job on calcium. But to that point, that's why I was just drinking an oat straw infusion, because that's got calcium in it. I've been taking a calcium supplement a bit because I do know that my body hates dairy. So for me, I'm not willing to eat the dairy and cause the inflammation to get the calcium. So I do need to think of more clever ways to get it for me. But anyway, I think that could be important. And we'll talk about that more probably in the mineral episode when we get to that. Heck, we might need 2 mineral episodes. I don't know yet at the rate we're going. But for at least now, again, riboflavin, definitely you need it for the clearance of histamine and the formation of DAO, that enzyme involved in histamine clearance. But this was one, so I told you right before we logged on that I was doing a couple of just rudimentary PubMed searches.
It's funny you say that too, because I feel like I probably know the article you're looking at, because last time we did this, I wasn't sure if we were going to do bees, and I did do some research last time. So tell me what you found.
Well, I don't have a single article for riboflavin, but instead, so all I did was I searched riboflavin intestinal, and I narrowed the search 2019 to 2021. So all of these are very new. There's 40 articles, but some of the titles: recent update on lactic acid bacteria producing riboflavin and folate, application for food fortification and treatment of intestinal inflammation. Sodium butyrate enhances intestinal riboflavin uptake. Riboflavin supplementation in patients with Crohn's disease. Let's see. There's another one about the lactic acid producing bacteria. Ability of riboflavin overproducing Lactobacillus plantarum strains to survive under gastrointestinal conditions. I mean, there's a lot of articles that I look forward to combing through, but it seems like there's a lot of information on riboflavin and the intestines in particular.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's kind of what I saw, like, when I was doing my search, I think I searched like intestinal permeability or like, just seeing like what it's doing in the gut lining.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure like most of the Bs have some connection.
Yeah.
To like fortifying the gut lining in some capacity.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. Like, again, being nourished seems to be helpful. Who knew?
Mind blown. Mind blown. I know. Well, and it's... and, like, when we are being sarcastic and persnickety like that, like, it's nothing against, like, the individual people. It's really, honestly, we're poking fun predominantly at the clinicians who are telling their patients bullshit lies or misleading them or giving them incomplete information about nutrition. Again, making people think that food is medicine equals you can just starve yourself to death and that'll heal your body, which is absolutely rubbish. And the general environment of the internet. I mean, people, I'll tell you, they will give anybody a YouTube channel. They'll give anybody a podcast. They'll give anybody a blog. They'll give anybody an Instagram channel. And I know because I have all 4 of those things.
Right.
There's no checks and balances. Like, you could be the biggest quack on planet Earth and you can have 1 million subscribers or 1 million followers. You could be utterly brilliant and have 5 followers. It really, there's so much to this internet influencer world that we're living in. And yeah, I think that the current conversation and the current model of gut healing is still so hyper-focused on restrict, and this food is evil, this food is bad, this food is always evil, that it's really exhausting for the individual and for people like us who know that is totally false. So, yeah, so don't get discouraged if you have been cutting out a lot of foods and you've kind of fallen for some of these traps. Don't beat yourself up. We're not picking on you. We're picking at the environment that created that problem for you. And like I mentioned, like, I was fairly paleo leaning for a while there, probably a good 3-4 years. And I was reading those same articles and I was like, oh, cool. I don't have to worry about calcium. Whatevs. And I just went on with my life. And it's only in more recent years, especially after my mom shattered her ankle and got diagnosed with progressed osteoporosis, that I was like, oh, damn. Well,
oh my gosh.
I guess I need to care about calcium after all. And I've kind of changed my tune in the last, 3-4 years. So we all are susceptible to the bullshit, but there's an awful lot of bullshit to pick on.
Right. I know.
Anyway, riboflavin. Further thoughts?
I don't have any further thoughts off my prepared.
That's all right. It's important. That's what you need to know.
It is important. It's important. Eat yourself some riboflavin today.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm like the person, that like in the 90s that was like, kids, don't do drugs, but it's like, eat food,
I know.
Eat your riboflavin.
Would you ever have thought? Yeah, and I think, I was telling Amy this too, I think that right now, I'm starting to gather notes because I really think I need to do a video on each specific nutrient for my YouTube channel in the future. Probably not for a while, but in the future I'll probably get to that point, and then maybe we'll revisit it and do an entire episode for each nutrient at some point too. Yeah. Lord knows we could if we just prepare a little bit more, but for right now, just know riboflavin's super important if you want energy or to clear histamine from the body or to heal the gut. It's probably important for your microbes. Again, some microbes produce riboflavin, some of them consume it. I think, and I might be incorrect, but I think Faecalibacterium prausnitzii consumes riboflavin. Let me look that up really quick. So that's another thing that I wanted to point out. Hold on.
Right, it's like the cross-talk or the cross-feeding type relationships that are going on in the gut. That we'll probably understand that a lot better like as years go on too.
Yeah, and it does look like, again, all I did was I typed into PubMed Faecalibacterium prausnitzii riboflavin. First article pops up. How can Faecalibacterium prausnitzii employ riboflavin for extracellular electron transfer? So yeah. And that's a 2012 article. So we've known this for a little while. So similarly, like if you've been trying to get that protective gut species up, and it keeps coming back low on stool testing, say like a GI map or a Thrive or a Somagen test. One of the ways that you might be able to feed it, if you're not able to tolerate FODMAPs yet, because F. Prinznitzii really likes FODMAPs. If you can't incorporate the grains or the legumes or the FODMAPs yet, one way, like a backdoor way to try to boost that bacteria and get some protection might be to boost your riboflavin intake.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another kind of food for thought moment for you as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, that being said, onward to niacin, vitamin B3.
Yeah, I did a PubMed search of niacin, and there's some interesting stuff too. Again, it seems like intestinal lining. It's at play in the intestinal lining. It boils it down to G protein. The G protein on the surface of the intestinal epithelium is activated by niacin. So there are some studies in here that looks like it seems to help with endotoxemia, so like preventing endotoxins from seeping into the bloodstream, which would essentially mean that it's helping with the intestinal barrier and preventing permeability. But yeah, it's interesting looking at specific nutrients, what you find when it's related to the intestines, but
and this is the thing too. We could spend an eternity on each nutrient, because if we even, if we popped open PubMed and searched, for example, niacin intestinal permeability, niacin microbiome, niacin gallbladder, niacin liver, niacin duodenum, ileum, colon. I mean, we could put in all these different keywords and probably get even more articles, but that takes so much time and effort to do that. And right now we're just going to kind of scrape the surface and make the case that all of these nutrients are important, and some of them are exceptionally difficult to get in a restricted diet. So for example, thiamine, if you're restricting carbs and legumes, you're going to be really hard pressed to get enough thiamine. When we get to the other B vitamins in the future, like vitamin B12, you're going to be really hard pressed to get B12 if you're a vegan or a vegetarian. I don't say that to poo-poo your diet, but I'm just saying, as somebody who was a vegetarian for a lot of years, it's tough to get B12 on a vegetarian or a vegan diet. That's it. So bringing your awareness to that can be really beneficial. But yeah, the niacin story, again, we thought about it a lot with regards to energy metabolism.
Yeah.
Like the Krebs cycle, right? Like you see NAD in all of those steps in the Krebs cycle. And I also think about it a lot for cholesterol and blood flow. Yeah. Because I know, niacin can make you flush. Even the non-flushing forms can make you flush potentially, but niacin supplementation oftentimes is recommended for people with high cholesterol, and it's oftentimes used as a way to promote blood flow and like nitric oxide production. Side note, did I ever tell you the time I overdosed on a product called Nitric Balance? God. So fortunately, unfortunately, I use myself as a guinea pig. So, okay. Flashback 10 years ago. I was still in school, and I remember I was going to Datis Karazian seminars like every other weekend. I was like, give me all your knowledge, Datis. And Apex had just come out with a new product that he formulated called Nitric Balance. And the idea was that it regulates nitric oxide production, and it can help increase blood flow. And he was talking, singing the praises for this particular supplement. And he was talking about how people who have cold hands and feet have poor blood flow. And if you can't get blood flow to your hands and your feet, you probably aren't getting good blood flow to your brain. And I was like, I'm like an animated corpse. I always have cold hands and feet. I was like, oh God. So he was like, yeah, these people need Nitric Balance. So I was like, cool, give me all of it. So I ordered a bunch from Apex. And
more is better, right? Yes, more is better.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and Datis's thing with all of his products that he formulates is try some, see what happens. If you don't notice anything, try more. Like, whether you're working on like neurotransmitter based stuff or whatever, he's like, yeah, try a low dose and then gradually increase it until you feel a difference. So I start with a normal human dose of Nitric Balance. Nothing. And like people are talking about it, like clinicians are talking about it. They're like, like, you take your shot of nitric balance, and then, like, the lights in the room seem brighter.
Right.
Because your brain just lights up, and I'm like, yeah, give me that. So I'm, like, all about this. So I take a shot of nitric balance, nothing happens. I'm like, okay, cool. Next time I take it, I take 2 shots. Nothing happens. I eventually got up to a point where I don't even know, like, I was taking like 4 ounces at a time. It was gross because it's very thick and very, like, minty and sweet and viscous. It's, ugh. Anyway, so I just kept upping the dose every time because I was like, I'm going to feel something eventually.
Right. I want to see the lights get brighter.
Yes. Or I want
the lights weren't getting brighter.
Or, like, I want my hands to not be corpse hands anymore, right?
Right.
So I was like, all right. And the point of this is niacin, non-flushing niacin is one of the ingredients in nitric balance. So I was like, all right, I'm going to feel it eventually. And I got up to this point where I was chucking down like 4 ounces at a time. And then
oh my gosh.
Gross. And finally, I felt something, but I had this, I like felt really hot all of a sudden. And then my roommates were home, they were cooking, and I was like, you know, we were all kind of sampling the food that we were making. And my roommates looked at me and were like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And I went and looked in the mirror, and my entire face was bright red, like totally splotchy. And like my neck and my chest, everything was super splotchy and red. And I had no idea what was going on. It didn't click that I had just taken nitric balance like 5 or 10 minutes prior to this. I just thought, oh, I'm in the kitchen and I'm sampling all of the food that the 3 of us are making. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having an allergic reaction to one of the foods. Oh my God. And I sat on the couch, and I remember telling them, I was like, Carol, Mamie, if I keel over, like, call 911. Like, I don't know what's happening. I think I'm having an allergic reaction, but my throat is not swelling up, so I think I'm okay. But I just sat there on the couch, totally panicked, for a good 5 minutes because I thought for sure I was going to die. And I kept telling them, I'm like, keep an eye on me because I need you guys to call 911 if I, like, keel over. And eventually, I don't know, I had the epiphany where I was like, oh, I was taking a supplement. And then I looked, and sure enough, non-flushing niacin is one of the ingredients. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Oh my
gosh.
Fast forward another month or two, I accidentally overdosed my mom, and she had the same problem.
Oh my gosh.
Because I was like, here, Mom, this will be good for you. No, she got a flush also. But the irony, too, is so I'm sitting there, and once I figured it out, I just laughed. My face was all hot, and, like, blood flow was coming to my face.
Right.
My hands were still freaking freezing.
Oh my God.
So I'm sitting there, and I'm thawing my icy cold hands on my face the entire time. And I'm like, this is so dumb. And I remember the next time I saw Tatis at a seminar, I told him the story, and he was just like, I guess it's not the supplement for you.
Right.
Like, no, Tatis, help me figure this out. He's like, I guess it's not for you. And I was like, damn it.
Oh my gosh.
Come on, don't I have like a weird genetic variant or something you can shine some light on? Nope. He was just like, yeah, don't take it anymore. I don't know. It was like, great.
Oh
so
my
anyway,
gosh.
Not flushing niacin can make you flush. I know because I've done it. Granted, I took a superhuman dose of the stuff. But going back to more academic and useful information. So blood flow, cholesterol, energy production, those are kind of the big deals with niacin typically. But I did pull up 2 articles that I thought were worth mentioning for niacin. So one of them is a 2020 article, Niacin and Butyrate, Nutraceuticals Targeting Dysbiosis and Intestinal Permeability in Parkinson's Disease. Mm-hmm. And they talked about that G protein coupled receptor and how butyrate acts on that receptor and increases the concentration of tight junction proteins and improves intestinal permeability. And niacin can do that as well. So cool. Pretty freaking cool. And some microbes can make niacin as well. But like you said, how much of that is absorbed and utilized by us versus staying local in the microbiome? Up for grabs. I would not count on your bacteria to make niacin for you. I would try to actually eat the stuff. But yeah, It seems like it helps with intestinal permeability. And then there's another article, 2019, Vitamin C and B3 as new biomaterials to alter intestinal stem cells. And again, they talked about how these vitamin C and niacin help decrease inflammation and and fortify the gut wall by increasing the expression of MUC2, MUC2, and they noted that MUC2 is deficient in inflammatory bowel disease typically. So it might even mean, out of all the people, all the diagnoses who would benefit from niacin specifically, maybe people with inflammatory bowel disease would be especially wise to think about niacin. But I would argue anybody who doesn't want a leaky gut should probably consume niacin.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I it's interesting too, because I know Chris Masterjohn also talked about niacin too. Like, if for certain people that take higher doses, some might feel fatigued. Like, they might initially feel like higher energy, but then there's some people that, and I forget what the mechanism was, but he said to look out for that if you're taking a little bit of a higher dose. It doesn't happen to everybody. Like, some people just continue to feel high energy. He said the mark for certain people is like 30, which, like, a lot of the, I think 30 milligrams, or it might have been micrograms. I think it was milligrams though. But most like multis have, a lot of them have like 95 or 100. But like, there's variability for some people with higher doses. Again, if I was more prepared, I'd go look at the mechanism. But he
that's right.
He did a video on it and explained it in more detail. It might have something to do with things getting backed up a bit. I forget what the mechanism was, but I'm sure you could find it if you search like Chris Masterjohn niacin.
Yeah.
But
again, we'll probably need to do an expanded series on nutrients eventually,
right,
and give each of these the time that they deserve. And funny enough, I was going to look at the dose on nitric balance, and it looks like they have since removed oh no, I take it back. It's xanthanol nicotinate is the form, but they don't give the dose of that specific ingredient in the mix. It's like a proprietary blend.
Right. I think the one that Chris Masterjohn was specifically talking about was like nicotinamide riboside. So I don't know, again, like if the form might affect like the dosing. But yeah, it was an interesting video, I remember. Yeah. But again, poor preparing for our
You get
our
what
podcast.
You get for free on the IBS Freedom Podcast.
All right. I get a D for preparedness for this episode.
It's again, and we have a lot to cover anyway, so we don't really have the time to do a great amount of detail for these nutrients, but we will in the future. It's just, we've got, we want to get to some other important information on this podcast before, we haven't even talked about hormones ever, aside from thyroid. So we need to talk about like hormones and some other stuff before we get to a full episode on niacin or a full episode on riboflavin. But yeah, I think another thing too, and we're going to get to this when we get to the whole like methylation concept, which is going to be more appropriate for the next episode. But with methylation, keep in mind it goes beyond folate and B12. Like, you need riboflavin, vitamin B2. You need that more so than folate, probably, if you have MTHFR polymorphisms. So don't get hyper focused on the folate thing. But similarly with niacin, it is involved in methylation to some degree, to a point where if you over methylate yourself, so like some people are really sensitive to methyl donors like methylcobalamin, methylfolate, SAM-E. So some people, this is not common, I've seen it happen like twice, but some people, when they take a methylated vitamin, they'll, like, their neurotransmitters go wacky. It's like one woman, she did this to herself before working with me, but I remember she was so funny about it. She was like, yeah, I started this new multi, and I was overcome by fits of rage. And she said, I thought it was just because I have 4 children. And then she, I'm pissed at my kids. But then she realized, oh no, it's the vitamin I started taking. Like, she's had 4 children for how long? And then out of the blue, she starts having these fits of rage. And then she put 2 and 2 together and realized, oh, I can't do methyl donors. Right. So now, like, that was one of the first times when I had to really look up. There are some non-methylated multis, like Seeking Health has one called Optimal Multivitamin -1 that's pretty good. And like it's non-methylated folate, non-methylated B12, like it's not going to dump you like that. But another patient, I wondered if she was going to be sensitive to this just because like her squirrely kind of health history and her symptom profile. And I just had a suspicion. So I was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to send you home with 1 capsule of a vitamin that has methyl donors in it. I like brought my own vitamin to work and like gave her one of mine. Right. I was like, all right, I'm sending you home with 1 capsule. You're going to take this capsule and you're going to warn your husband that things might get weird and you might act differently, but to keep your eyes peeled for that. And then I want you to report back. If you tolerate it, great, because I definitely think you need more B vitamins. But if you don't tolerate it, let me know. She said for her, it was different. She said she was packing for like a 3-day, long vacation with her friend. They were going to the Outer Banks. And she was packing her suitcase after she took the multivitamin. And she said just like all of a sudden she kind of came to. Like she totally spaced out. And she came to and she looked down at her suitcase and she had packed like 32 pairs of underwear and a t-shirt. And that was it. And then she had zipped up her suitcase and she's like, I'm packed. So for that woman, it turned her into a total space cadet for a while. And so for her, she was another one where I was like, okay, we're not doing methylated anything ever again.
Yeah.
You need the non-methylated stuff. But the point with niacin, if you find yourself in one of these like bizarro situations where you take a methylated vitamin and you think it frigged up your neurotransmitters, if you have the cognitive awareness or the sense to realize what's happening, you can take some niacin and it'll help, and I'm using air quotes, it'll help mop up the methyl donors and curtail that reaction a bit. So for what it's worth, I don't think most people need that, but for those 2 people where it was like really out there stuff and it really frigged up their neurotransmitters, it would have been nice to have a couple tablets of niacin handy.
Right. No, I totally agree.
Yeah. And to that point too, if you're a person who's worried at all about maintaining normal methylation balance, which I think most of us would like, then you might want to be cautious of super high doses of niacin. Because again, you're going to suck up a lot of your methyl donors and you're going to potentially interfere with that system. Again, like rule of thumb, try to eat all the nutrients and don't super duper ultra mega dose on any single nutrient if you can get away with it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes things get weird and they start like competing with each other or mucking with each other's coenzymes, and niacin is definitely one that will muck with the methylation cycle if you take it at too high of a dose for too long. So it could make you think that you're hypomethylating, and I don't know if it's been researched with homocysteine, but theoretically, if it slows down methylation, it could make your homocysteine crawl up a little bit if you take too much niacin, theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't seen it, but could happen.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Okay. Well, as you guys know, there is no vitamin B4, not that I'm aware of at least. So we're going to skip over B4 into B5. Amy, words of wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, typically with B5, as long as you're eating, like, it's pretty rare to have a deficiency in it.
Yeah.
It's not one that I usually pay tons of attention to just because it's rarely an issue.
Yeah.
Is that sort of your thinking?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's difficult to get a full-blown deficiency. Even when I look at things like the Nutri-Eval or the organic acids test, I don't see it blatantly low very frequently. As opposed to like riboflavin, B1, folate, B12, I see deficiencies and insufficiencies in those pretty frequently. But yeah, B5, not a lot of deficiencies. You do need it, again, for metabolism, particularly like the Krebs cycle. But it's not something that a lot of people become deficient in. And let's see. For example, I just did like the quickest, cheesiest of Google searches. Foods with B5. And hold on. Okay, and it really runs the gamut. Meat, meat, fish, grains, dairy, legumes, a fair amount of vegetables, mushroom, not a vegetable technically. Medical news today, classifying mushrooms as a vegetable, I'm going to judge you. But mushrooms, avocado, also not a vegetable. Mushrooms, avocado, broccoli, sweet potatoes, corn, cauliflower, kale, tomatoes, brewer's yeast, peanuts, sunflower seeds. I mean, there's a lot of foods, even on restricted diets. I mean, hell, even that one patient, when she was doing figure posing, she was at least eating damn broccoli and chicken. So even on really, really, really restricted diets, there's usually at least a little bit of food that you're going to get B5 from.
Right.
So
right.
I think it's less of an OMG nutrient in my book, at least at this point.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so B5, usually not a problem child.
Yeah, it's you'd be hard pressed to create a deficiency in that. You would have to eat like 2 foods for a long time.
Right.
But let's move on to B6, yeah? So pyridoxine. Yeah. And this, oh goodness, yeah, there's a little bit more to talk about with B6. Again, it's not as common to have overt deficiencies. I do see it a little bit on the lower side of normal, like, 30th percentile, 40th percentile, something like that on organic acids testing sometimes. My biggest thing that I'll share with B6, the reason why I pay attention to it is primarily either for histamine issues, as we mentioned earlier, but also oxalate. If you are a person who struggles with oxalate overload, or if you have measured that on an organic acids test or a Nutri-Eval, and if you know that oxalate is a problem for you, you want to have superhuman levels of B6. So that's really the thing that I pay attention to. So like on organic acids testing, if I see oxalate high and B6 on like the lower end of normal, I'm usually telling people, look, this B6 would cut the mustard for a normal person. But for somebody like you who has high oxalate right now and you want to clear that crap out of your body, you're going to want superhuman amounts of B6 for at least a month or 2. And it usually does help quite a lot. So I'll oftentimes have people do like P5P from Pure Encapsulations and just take like 1 or 2 of those a day for a month or 2. And it usually does help with oxalate clearance quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, when you're talking about P5P, that's the activated form. Because certain multis don't, I would say most multis don't have the active form.
Correct.
Some do. But if you're struggling with a B6 issue, I would try to find the active form.
Yeah.
I think with B6 as well, it's interesting that you mentioned the oxalate and the histamine connections. I think it can be really beneficial for people that have painful menstrual cycles. That's something that's been studied a decent amount, is connecting B6 to that. And I think it could have some stuff to do with like liver detoxification. But I wonder a little bit, now that you bring up the histamine scenario.
Or oxalate too.
Right. Like if it helps kind of lower the inflammation a bit. Like, so when you're going through menstruation, if you have painful periods, if it's kind of calming some of the inflammation when you take a supplement, but it has been linked to like helping with cramps and like painful periods. So whenever I see people that have that, we might throw in a B6 just to see if they respond.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because actually there's a few angles that this would make sense. So B6, again, needed for the clearance of extracellular histamine. So, and if you have boatloads of histamine, that's going to create a more inflammatory environment and your immune cells are going to go bonkers. So the inflammation thing would make sense. Oxalate can be really persnickety and awful in its own right because it essentially crystallizes and embeds itself in tissues. So some people who have a lot of pain, especially like muscle pain, like fibro type pain, theoretically that could be because of the crystallized oxalate in tissues. So I wonder if oxalate could hunker down in the uterus as well and make that tissue more irritated and more inflamed because of the deposition of the crystals. Another angle too, I remember a friend of mine who's an OBGYN, who I should ask to be on the podcast. Oh, how have I never thought of this before? So anyway, that's another thought for another day. But a friend of mine who's an OBGYN, I remember when I was pregnant, and we were talking about, I don't know, pregnancy and labor stuff. She shared, there was an article that she had shown me that they said women who have more painful menstrual cramps have more nerves in their, like more nerve endings in their uterus. So they're actually like picking up on the pain perception more. So for some women, maybe it's more of like a nervous system kind of component. And I know B6 can also be helpful for neuropathy. I actually have a patient, her husband swears by B6, the P5P5 form, right, because P5P has been really helpful for his peripheral neuropathy, and nothing else has touched it. So it's interesting. Like, I wonder if it's a nervous system, like innervation kind of thing, an inflammation thing, or like a crystal deposits in the tissue and tissue irritation angle. So that's very interesting.
And I know it plays a role in like neurotransmitters too, which I don't know, might play into it from the nervous system angle. But it's interesting. I would have to dig through some articles to see like what the hypothesis was in the articles, which like sometimes it's just that, it's like them speculating why. But it's very clearly researched that it's like one of the two things. It's like magnesium and B6. Yeah. And magnesium you can kind of understand more clearly, but there could be a number of things for the B6.
Yeah. Well, and I will say this too. Another thing that B6 has a good reputation for is nausea. So like especially in pregnancy, vitamin B6 and ginger are the two kind of go-to supplements for pregnancy-associated nausea. So it doesn't work for everybody, but for a fair amount of people, it's very effective. So likewise, even if you're not pregnant, if you struggle with nausea as part of your kind of GI symptom profile, maybe you're a bit deficient on B6 as well. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, to that point earlier, I'm going to do a takesy-backsy a little bit on something that we said earlier. A little, like, it's not a takesy-backsy, it's an asterisk next to something we said. So remember, like, 20 minutes ago, you said, well, at least with nutrition, you can at least, like, quantify and measure things.
Yeah.
Yes. But there's also, like, that individuality piece.
Right.
Like I said, theoretically, like, say I have a patient who has a ton of oxalate in their organic acids urine test, like, off the charts, 400. And say they have what looks like a normal amount of B6, like, 40th percentile of B6. Again, oftentimes I'm having that conversation of, this would be perfectly adequate for a normal person who wasn't overburdened with oxalate.
Right.
But for you want your B6, like, way up so that you can process and get rid of that oxalate. So, like, we could measure a nutrient and that could give us some information, don't get me wrong. But sometimes you need more than the average bear for a particular nutrient. So you also need to kind of like trust your intuition or have your practitioner who has a good sense of this intuition and kind of like follow that gut feeling as well. And I'd like to share an article too. I actually have this saved like in my, Chrome bookmark, so it was easy for me to pop up. But sometimes the topic of B vitamin overdose comes up. And the general consensus for most of the B vitamins is that you can't really overdose. If you take too much, you're just going to pee it out anyway, right? Like, that's why you could get away with taking like 33,000% of your daily value of B12 or something ludicrous.
Right, right.
But there's a couple of little side notes for this. So for example, B6, there's a little bit more concern with overdose or toxicity. But what's really, really, really interesting is that if you stick with food and if you stick with the good form of the supplement, the likelihood of that, I think, decreases substantially. So for example, 2017 article, titled The Vitamin B6 Paradox. Supplementation with high concentrations of pyridoxine leads to decreased vitamin B6 function. And what they did, this was, I believe, a Petri dish study. It was CACO2 cells. And it was basically Petri dish, and they observed it. But what they showed was if you bathe these cells in a high dose of the supplemental form of B6, pyridoxine or pyridoxine HCl, which is in like practically all of the multivitamins out there, except for the really good ones. If you bathe these cells in this crap form of B6, then they actually start exhibiting symptoms of B6 deficiency. And they make a note that it's interesting that signs of toxicity oftentimes mimic the symptoms of deficiency, like neuropathy. Like neuropathy is a symptom of vitamin B6 toxicity and deficiency. Right. And basically it looks like the pyridoxine HCl, the man-made form of B6, goes to the cells, docks on the receptors, and then does jack shit. And it blocks the ability of real B6 to actually do its dang job. So if you're going to supplement with B6, please, for the love of God, get the P5P form, the pyridoxal 5-phosphate form. Don't do high doses of pyridoxine HCl because it could actually make the deficiency worse. Yeah. But I thought that was a really fascinating study. It's only a couple of years old, but I would be really curious to see this play out in humans. I don't know if they can intentionally try to induce B6 toxicity, if that would be like an ethical issue in the study. Right. But yeah, it really makes you wonder why toxicity and deficiency have very similar symptoms, and then if you pick apart the type of B6. But yeah, they said in conclusion, the present study indicates that the neuropathy observed after taking relatively high doses of vitamin B6 supplements is due to pyridoxine. The inactive form of pyridoxine competitively inhibits the active pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Consequently, symptoms of B6 supplementation are similar to those of B6 deficiency. Pretty wild stuff. Now, that being said, if you're taking a vitamin and you've taken a B vitamin for a while, don't go into a total panic, because what was it? We talked about this not that long ago. The amount of B6 you would have to take to actually overdose on the stuff is outrageously high. Like, what is it, 100 milligrams or something? And most B complexes, you're getting like 5. Right. So the likelihood of overdosing on most vitamins and supplements is pretty low, unless you're really just jacking them up through the roof. But if you're going to take a high dose of B6 for the sake of oxalate or histamine purposes or whatever have you, do make sure it's the P5P form. And for that, I have been known to give people 50 milligrams of P5P twice a day, and they do fine on it across the board. So
yeah, I'm totally in agreement with you there. I think it's interesting. I didn't know the oxalate connection, so that's really interesting. But yeah, it's crazy how nutrition's crazy.
That's our show, folks. No, we have one more. Yeah, it is. It's crazy.
Oh, we have Biotin. Oh my gosh, I keep thinking we're at the end of the rope.
No, the forgotten child, Biotin. Darn it all. No, we have one more. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it to you for Biotin for starters. I have a little bit to weigh in on poor Biotin. It's like the forgotten stepchild in this episode.
Well, Biotin, an interesting tidbit on Biotin, just from a personal story, Biotin can affect thyroid labs.
Yep.
And at first I didn't know that. And so I took a lab, like a thyroid lab, and my TSH has always been like sometimes a little bit too low, but never like low. Like I did a thyroid panel. My TSH was like 0.0 something. Okay. Yeah. Like it was low. It was really low. And the doc's like, I don't know, like this seems weird, but your other hormones are fine. Like again, no exploration.
Yeah. No.
And I'm like, okay, I'll like recheck it without taking Biotin. And then my TSH was totally normal, and my free T3 was normal. Like, again, like, it's so interesting that, like, a supplement could affect your labs. I just think if you're ever doing thyroid labs, be careful of biotin, is my initial thought, just because of my own history. Yeah. With thyroid things.
Kind of goes both ways too. Like, for you, your TSH was showing too low, right? And it might have made you wonder about hyperthyroidism and go down that kind of rabbit hole. Right. But similarly, if you have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's and you're monitoring TSH to make sure that your medication is correct, or making sure that you don't need to go on medication,
right?
Don't let biotin fool you. Your TSH might be worse than you think it is, but because you're taking a multi or a B vitamin with biotin, you might be fooled into thinking that your TSH is fine.
Right. And I think it also raises free T3 from what I read. So it can just make things look a little bit better from a free T3 standpoint too, which is like the activated thyroid hormone. Yeah. So biotin's interesting. I know biotin can also be a bit of an antifungal as well. I don't know if you've heard that before.
No, I don't know if I knew that. Hold on, I'm going to do a PubMed search. Hold on. Biotin fungi.
Are you intrigued?
I am very intrigued. Biotin definitely deserves its own episode. All right, the second hit, 2020 article. Fungal biotin homeostasis is essential for immune evasion after macrophage phagocytosis and virulence. Interesting. Oh, here's another. The role of biotin in bacterial physiology and virulence, a novel antibiotic target for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Very interesting. I'm going to have to do a little bit more of a dive on this one. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some research on this, in part because biotin is quite anti-inflammatory. Yeah. So I was sharing, before we hopped on the call, this functional medicine guy, Alex Vasquez, has, that sounds so disrespectful. The guy has 3 doctorate degrees. He's a DC, he's a chiropractor, naturopath, and osteopath. He has 3 clinical doctorate degrees. He's insane. So he's like super boss. But I have all of his books. I'm kind of a fangirl. But interestingly, I remember when I first became familiar with his body of work, a lot of his stuff, earlier at least, focused a lot on the mitochondria and like mitochondrial stress and ribosomal or Golgi apparatus stress. And one of the things that he would use with a lot of his autoimmune patients and a lot of his very, very inflamed patients, he had this big multi-part protocol for reducing inflammation. And one of the supplements that he used is high-dose biotin. Like, I forget what the dose was now, but it was pretty high-dose biotin, green tea polyphenols, NAC, fish oil, I think maybe CoQ10. I would have to look up the rest. But he had this whole big protocol outlined. It was like a million different pills all day, every day. But high-dose biotin was one of those things. And then it comes up. I did do just a couple of searches. So here's an article, 2020. Biotin supplementation ameliorates murine colitis by preventing NF-kappa B activation. So it prevents colitis in this mouse model. When they tried to induce it, they intentionally tried to give these mice colitis. And it was because of the anti-inflammatory effect of biotin that the biotin successfully prevented colitis from being induced. So, wow, pretty neato stuff. Now, what was the dose? And could you get up to that dose in a human? I don't know. But again, biotin is made by the microbes, right? So it would make sense that there would be some crosstalk between your microbes, your intestinal epithelial cells, your immune cells in the gut, maybe the mucus-producing cell or the Paneth cells, like all of these cells that are in and around the gut microbes. It would stand to reason that any nutrient that the gut microbes are producing would interface with one or more of those systems or one or more of those body parts. So yeah, this was a pretty neat study. And I like that they talked about NF-kappa B. that's the same type of inflammatory cascade that we talk about a lot with regards to like turmeric and curcumin and resveratrol and green tea, boswellia, like a lot of those quote unquote anti-inflammatory herbs decrease NF-kappa B activation. So pretty wild stuff. And you can get biotin for pretty cheap. And really the only safety concern is that it'll muck with your thyroid labs transiently. It doesn't actually, I should say this too. I think, I might be incorrect, but I think if I remember correctly, biotin doesn't actually change your TSH that you are producing. I think the way it works is that the TSH test is a biotin-based assay. Yeah. And the test basically, like, it picks up on the biotin and it thinks that it's TSH or vice versa. Right. So I think it's just a biotin-based assay, and then that's why it makes it look artificially lower. I don't think it actually does anything to, like, the amount of TSH that your brain is producing, if I remember correctly.
I don't think it does either. I think you're right. It's probably, like, some weird testing issue.
It's joshing you.
Yeah, because it's, like, it's pretty much remedies itself relatively quickly. Like again, if you stop taking the biotin, it'd be fine. So yeah.
And then I have one more article that I just popped up on a quick PubMed search. Hold on, where's the biotin part of it though? Actually, no, never mind. I thought this was a biotin one. I'm one of those people. I always have too many tabs open. It's like my addiction. So I thought.
Nikki, I'm looking at literally like 15 tabs as you said that.
Yeah. So this was just one that I opened because I want to read this article eventually. It's not relevant to the current conversation. So sorry about that. False alarm. But anyway, biotin, very useful as an anti-inflammatory. Obviously, people know it for hair, skin, and nail kind of purposes. But really, mitochondria, inflammation, that sort of stuff, anything that involves inflammation could potentially benefit from biotin. And it probably has some direct roles on gut epithelial healing, mucus lining, etc. But I think for the time being, just know all of these nutrients are important. Again, if you have histamine issues or oxalate issues or motility issues, there might be one nutrient that you want to emphasize and really pay attention to a bit more closely than the others. But every human on planet Earth needs all of these B vitamins that we talked about. It's like helping you triage which one matters the most.
Right. Which B vitamin are you going to put the oxygen mask on first?
Yeah. I like that way of thinking of it. Well, and to be quite honest too, and I don't know how much you get this with your work, but I think people will take advice and run with it and implement it if it feels specific to them.
Right.
But if it's like really broad information, I think people have an easier time checking out and being like, that doesn't matter. Like, no, that has nothing to do with me specifically. I'm special, darn it. Right. And we all get that. We all have the I'm special syndrome, but it can kind of help the information stick a little bit more if one of these nutrients really resonated with you, and then it can open the conversation for you to care about the other nutrients. They're all important. It's just that, if one of these tidbits of information really resonated and struck a chord with you, then by all means start with that first and then consider the other ones, in and amongst that.
I feel like this whole episode we're like the hype girls for B vitamins.
They're really important.
I know. We're happy to be the hype girls.
Absolutely. And you just wait, dear listeners. You wait until you open the can of worms with me on folate, MTHFR, B12.
Oh, good Lord.
I'll just tell you now, you are not genetically doomed. Today, as an example, I had to kind of grit my teeth a little bit. I was doing a live Q&A in my Facebook group, and I was going through the questions from the group from last week or two, and then people were asking questions live. And as I'm combing through these questions that people mentioned, one woman in particular, bless her heart, mentioned, she had SIBO, it relapsed, she thinks because of taking a PPI. I was like, I'm not surprised by that at all. I've seen that happen before. but her SIBO relapsed, and she said, I've also been diagnosed by my functional doctor. I've also been diagnosed with Lyme, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, SIRS. It's like a biotoxin illness, and methylation issues. And I was just like, oh, my head hurts. Oh,
all right.
God. I have so many opinions on all three of those things. Dear God. And I had to kind of distill all of my opinions on Lyme disease and biotoxin illness and methylation issues and be like polite and helpful to her. But if I see that trifecta from a functional medicine doctor, I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
I bet you're incorrect about at least one of those. Like, not to sound like a jerk, but it's like the sexy thing, right? Like, similarly, I have had 2 people in recent Q&As in my Facebook group say that they were diagnosed with SIBO based on stool testing, to which I want to take those doctors, and diagnosed by a functional medicine doctor, mind you, and I want to take those doctors, I just want to shake them.
Oh my God.
That is not possible.
Yeah.
That's a whole other can of worms that annoys the crap out of me. But, I messed up my microphone. But you cannot diagnose SIBO based on a stool test. You cannot do that. It's not a thing. There's, like, I did a whole video on this, and I did a crazy rant about why that's not possible, including research articles to back this up. It's not just me being crazy. But similarly, I hear biotoxin and Lyme disease and methylation issues, and I'm like, oh, those are the sexy topics in functional medicine.
Right.
And, and then SIBO on top of that, I'm like, yep, 3 or 4 really sexy topics that, like, honestly, that I think functional medicine uses to scare the piss out of their patients and make them compliant and make them give you thousands of dollars of money. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if I believe that this woman has had Lyme. And I say that as somebody who's had Lyme disease. It's not like I'm a denier, but I do see that get tossed around more willy-nilly than it should be. Because it really scares the crap out of people.
Well, I think it's also like, if someone's not getting better, it can be like an easy cop-out, unfortunately. Or like
that's true.
And I think, like, we've talked about parasites before, too. There's just sometimes their own rules of how they're interpreting data.
Yeah.
Like, if there's no, and again, like, there's certain exceptions to testing. Like, I understand that, but, like, sometimes there's no supportive evidence for the conclusion of, like, Lyme or certain things. So,
eventually we'll have to do an episode on Lyme. Like, not soon, but in the distant future, because I've had that topic come up, and I've had people ask, can Lyme disease be a root cause for SIBO? And in truth, I don't think we know. But we can start to build some hypotheses and talk about it in an intelligent way. But I think that very frequently Lyme is a very sexy scapegoat. And I think methylation issues too. Like, I had one patient, I remember when I very first met her, I told her, I said, I think you have SIBO. And this was when I didn't know nearly as much about SIBO as I do now. But she kind of, like, it didn't really strike a chord with her for whatever reason, and she kind of vaporized for a couple years. And then she worked with various other functional medicine doctors in the area. And I remember when she came back to work with me, and we fleshed out that hypothesis. Side note, she did have SIBO, and she had the post-infectious IBS variation of that. Mm-hmm. So IBS Smart was a really helpful tool for us to understand her kind of thing that she was dealing with. But for her, I remember she went to this guy who's 20, 30 minutes away from me. He's in Raleigh, I think. And he's like the methylation guy. And literally, it doesn't matter what symptoms you walk in with. He's going to diagnose you with a methylation problem. He's going to insist on doing like a 23andMe type of profile and, I don't know, like organic acids or Nutrieval or something like that. And she was taking a buttload of B vitamins and getting labs drawn and monitoring homocysteine, and she has MTHFR, so you're totally doomed. Oh my God, you have methylation defects. And she was doing this for several months, didn't feel better, wasted a ton of money, and then she was so deeply frustrated when she came back to work with me. And it's like, yeah, that happens. Like, some people are really, frankly, enchanted by the methylation conversation, and it's like, I don't know. I think it's a really easy way to get people to be scared and have them buy into a couple $1,000s worth of a care package. And
well, I think too, like the methylation scenario in any sort of genetic SNP, which again, we could probably do a whole episode on genetic SNPs.
We should.
But I think that they oftentimes, whenever you're talking about anything genetic, they can be very hopeless. Like, it can be hopeless because it's like you can't change your genes. Like, you're stuck.
You're doomed.
And so, like, with MTHFR, like, so many people are heterozygous. Like, so many people have some sort of mutation in the MTHFR. Like, I almost think it's, like, sometimes even more abnormal not to have an MTHFR, at least some sort of SNP. So it's overblown. And I think, again, like, it also boils it down to one nutrient. And like what you were saying before, like methylation requires so many different nutrients. It's not just folate.
Vitamins,
right,
minerals,
right.
And the clearance of histamine and the clearance of oxalate. Like,
right.
Yeah,
so it just oversimplifies things and also puts you in a mindset that's not right. Because you're like, well, I'm genetically just altered.
Yeah.
And this is going to...
It turns a little bit mind-washy or brainwashy in a way of like, people fall way down the rabbit hole. And again, like I've seen people who have high homocysteine. We get them out of B vitamin or, like a multivitamin that contains Bs, and their homocysteine drops right back down to normal. And I've seen people who have, a high homocysteine and the B vitamins aren't the be all end all, and we need to do other stuff with nutrition. But, and I was enchanted by the genetic SNPs kind of thing, because the whole selling point is it's bio-individuality. You can tailor everything based on you as the unique, special snowflake individual person. And it's very appealing to think that you can tailor things to that degree. But I think it's a slippery slope. If discovering you have MTHFR SNPs makes you care about nutrition and like track your folate and track your B vitamins and give a rat's ass about nutrition more, absolutely wonderful. More power to you. I think that's great. But if the discovery of a SNP makes you fall down this rabbit hole of like, I'm doomed and I have to take superhuman doses of all of these vitamins and I have to take 8 million different pills, because I have to have a folate supplement and a riboflavin supplement and a B12 supplement and a sublingual and a chewable and an injection and a whatever. It's like, no, if you're taking more than 2 supplements for your methylation, you are taking too many supplements for your methylation.
Right.
I'm just going to say that for starters.
Right.
Like, I could get behind a multivitamin or like a B complex, and I could maybe get behind something like SAMe.
Yeah.
But if you're taking more than that because you think you're treating methylation or because you think you have a methylation problem, I think somebody gave you a bum steer at some point, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yep. But we will talk more about that in the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. We're gonna, we're is it tantalizing or tittillating? I don't know what the word is, but
I don't like titillating. Well,
we're doing whatever it is. we're teasing you with that. But yes, we will open that full can of worms and we'll talk about MTHFR. I am a compound heterozygote carrier. I've got one of each of them, so I'm no stranger to MTHFR stuff. But there's a lot of myths and a lot of microbial considerations for all of this. So we will talk about that in depth in our next episode. As always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. You know the drill. Amy's tipping her little miniature top hat right now if you can't see it on video. But as always, if you would consider sharing the IBS Freedom Podcast, either this episode or another favorite episode, in any of the online groups that you're in, SIBO groups, IBS groups, that would be so deeply appreciated. Help us get this information out to people who need it the most. And if you are on YouTube, if you could click subscribe, leave us a comment. We do gather Q&A questions and do Q&As every now and then. Go find us on Instagram, find us on, where else are we? That's it. YouTube, podcast, Instagram.
You can email us.
Yeah, theoretically. I forget the email now, though.
Right.
I never check it. But, it's Instagram, YouTube, comments. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of us and ask your questions. And we will see you on the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. Toodaloo!